I want to begin this book with an honest admission to you. If you are listening to this right now, chances are you are not a lazy person, nor someone who lacks intelligence or ambition. In fact, you may be someone who has read a lot, thought a lot, and understands quite clearly what you should be doing, yet still finds yourself unable to do it. You know you need to start. You know it matters. You even know the consequences of continuing to delay. And yet, day after day, you remain stuck. What exhausts you the most is not the unfinished work itself, but the feeling of helplessness that comes from watching yourself repeat the same familiar pattern. You promise yourself that tomorrow will be different, and then tomorrow arrives, and you find a reason that sounds reasonable enough to postpone things just a little longer. Each time that happens, a small part of your self-respect quietly erodes. This book is not written for people who have never tried. It is written for those who have tried many times and failed in the same way. People who have begun to doubt themselves, to wonder whether something is wrong with them, or whether discipline and action are things meant only for others. I know that feeling, because I have been there myself. I used to believe that if I could just find more motivation, more inspiration, or a more perfect plan, everything would finally fall into place. But the more I tried to prepare, the more I delayed, and the more I delayed, the more I disliked myself. The most important realization I came to, and the reason this book exists, is that procrastination is not a problem of willpower, but a problem of mechanism. When you place a brain that is afraid of making mistakes and afraid of imperfection into an environment that demands doing things right, doing them well, and doing them completely from the very beginning, paralysis is almost inevitable. You do not lack desire. You simply cannot begin in the way you believe is acceptable, and every time you fail to begin, you unknowingly learn a dangerous lesson, that you are someone who cannot be trusted. This book does not promise to turn you into a perfect person, nor does it promise to make you a cold, relentless machine of discipline. What I aim to do is help you regain a sense of control through the smallest possible steps, by changing how you begin rather than continuing to force yourself to finish perfectly. I am not asking you to believe me right away, and I am not asking you to change who you are. The only thing I hope you will hold on to as you continue listening is a very simple permission, the permission to act before you feel ready, and to observe what actually happens. If you are tired of negotiating with yourself, tired of the repeated feeling of breaking promises to yourself, and tired of understanding so much while doing so little, then perhaps you are exactly where you need to be. This book does not begin with a grand promise. It begins with a small question for you. If the problem is not that you lack discipline, but that the way you have been trying to discipline yourself is flawed, what might happen if you paused and learned a different way to operate? Chapter 1. Smart but Powerless. When you begin listening to this chapter, you may not be tired because you are doing too much. You may be tired because you are not doing the things you know you should be doing. Each day passing with the feeling that you are standing still while time keeps moving. And what exhausts you is not the work itself, but a quiet sense of helplessness that stretches from morning to night. If you are here, there is a good chance you are a person with thoughts, with desires, with standards for yourself. And it is precisely those standards that make each moment of procrastination feel like a small step backward. Not in the eyes of others, but in your own. You know you could do better, yet you do not act. And the gap between knowing and doing is where your self-respect is slowly worn down. Perhaps you have grown used to telling yourself that you lack discipline, that you are lazy, that you are not strong enough. And you repeat these words so often that they start to feel like facts, even though something inside you still feels off. I want you to pause here for a moment and observe, because if you were truly lazy, you would not feel guilty, you would not feel uneasy watching others move forward, and you would not be listening to an audiobook like this while feeling drained. Your problem is not that you do not want to act. It is what happens at the moment you are about to begin. In those first few seconds, there is always a familiar force holding you back, calm and reasonable, telling you that you can do it later, that today is not the right time, that you need more preparation. Because these thoughts sound sensible, you trust them without realizing they are simply an old avoidance reflex. Your brain does not care whether you achieve your goals. It cares about whether you feel safe and comfortable right now. And anything that threatens to make you feel inadequate is delayed to protect that feeling. As you hear this, you may feel slightly lighter, not because you are being comforted, but because for the first time, your exhaustion is being named correctly. You are not a failure because you lack willpower. You are paralyzed by the fear of not doing well enough, and that paralysis is cleverly hidden behind intelligent-sounding reasons. Each time you listen to those reasons, you are not just postponing a task, you are breaking a promise to yourself, and each broken promise reduces your trust in yourself a little more. Eventually, you stop believing that you will do what you say you will do. And when that trust is gone, you begin waiting for feelings, for motivation, for a different moment, and the loop repeats itself. You may have tried to force yourself, to be harsher, to criticize yourself in the hope that enough pain would trigger change, but if that worked, you would not be here. The more you force, the more you fear. The more you fear, the more you avoid. And the more you avoid, the more you begin to dislike yourself. Until you believe the problem is who you are. In this chapter, I am not asking you to do anything yet. I only want you to face one truth, that those first moments of hesitation are not moments of deep thinking. They are moments when the brain is negotiating to escape discomfort. When you see that, when you start viewing the procrastinating voice as a reflex rather than a truth, its power weakens. And you may still not act immediately, but you stop condemning yourself the way you used to. And that pause in self-blame is the quiet starting point of the changes that come next. I am not promising you will feel inspired after this chapter. I only want you to understand that you are not broken. You are simply running on a faulty mechanism. And once that mechanism is seen clearly, action is no longer as distant as you once believed. Chapter 2. The Negotiator in Your Head. When you enter this chapter, you may not only be tired of procrastination, you may be tired of talking to yourself too much, tired of the constant inner dialogue where one part of you wants to act while another pulls you back, and that tug of war drains your energy before you even begin. The feeling is familiar each time you are about to do something, even something small. Sensible-sounding thoughts appear immediately, telling you that now is not the right moment, that you need more preparation, that doing it later would be more effective. And while you are still weighing these options, time passes, the task stays where it is, and you are left with a small sense of relief mixed with a growing disappointment in yourself. What traps you is not the act of thinking, but the belief that these thoughts are your reason, your careful judgment, when in reality you are being guided by a voice that has learned to negotiate in order to delay action. This voice is not loud or aggressive. It is gentle and understanding. It tells you that you deserve rest, that working in a less than ideal state will ruin things, that waiting a little longer would be better. And precisely because it sounds so reasonable, you rarely question it. You do not realize that each time you listen, you are handing control of your behavior to a part of the brain that only cares about comfort in the present moment, not about long-term goals or your sense of self-respect. This negotiator does not appear to harm you. It appears to protect you from discomfort, from the feeling of failure, from facing an imperfect version of yourself. And because its only mission is to help you avoid pain right now, it is willing to trade away your future self-respect. As days go by, you may not notice how many times you have negotiated with yourself. You only know that you keep postponing, keep promising yourself that you will do it later, that tomorrow will be different. And the more you promise without acting, the more you come to believe that you are unreliable. This does not happen because you lack determination, but because you have never separated yourself from the negotiating voice in your head. You think it is you, so you listen to it as if it were the truth, when in fact it is only a psychological reflex repeated long enough to feel familiar. When a thought appears saying that now is not the time, that you should wait, you usually accept it immediately. You do not pause to ask who is speaking, and that lack of pause is what allows the negotiator to grow stronger. It has never been named, never been questioned, never been seen as something separate from you. You may have believed that your problem was a lack of motivation or discipline, but rarely have you considered that the real issue is allowing a voice that does not represent your long-term interests to make decisions for you. That voice does not care how you feel at the end of a day spent avoiding what matters. It only cares about whether you have to face discomfort right now. And because of that, every time you enter a negotiation with it, you almost always lose, because you are using logic to argue with a reflex, and a reflex does not need good reasons. It only needs reasons that sound easy enough. In this chapter, I am not asking you to fight that voice, and I am not asking you to defeat it. All I ask is that you see it. See that there is a negotiator in your mind that constantly seeks to bargain, constantly suggests delay, and that this negotiator is not you, not your true nature, and not the voice that represents your goals and values. Simply recognizing that familiar delaying phrases are not absolute truths, but avoidance reflexes, already shifts the balance. You may still not act immediately, but you are no longer trapped in the endless dialogue, no longer arguing or trying to persuade yourself. You begin to hold a small space between thought and action, a space where you neither obey nor resist, but simply notice. And that small space, even before it leads to action, is a sign that you are slowly taking back the control you once gave away without realizing it. Chapter 3. Procrastination is not laziness. Before we go any further, I want you to pause for a moment, not to think more, just to notice your real state right now. If you are listening this far, chances are you are not tired from doing too much. You are tired from understanding too much and doing too little. You know what you should do. You also know why you should do it. But every time you are about to start, your body feels heavy. Your mind hesitates. And then the familiar feeling shows up. Disappointment. Frustration. As if you have betrayed yourself one more time. This matters. Because if you do not name this exhaustion correctly, you will keep treating the wrong problem. Many people, and maybe you too, believe the problem is laziness, or lack of discipline, or not being strong enough. So they push harder. They tense up more. They talk to themselves more harshly. They hope that this time they will be different, but the result is often the opposite. The more they force it, the harder it becomes to start. The more they force it, the more they procrastinate. And the more they force it, the faster their trust in themselves wears away. I am not saying this to comfort you. I am asking a very direct question. If you have been forcing yourself for years and nothing has truly improved, is it possible that you have misdiagnosed the problem? Procrastination rarely comes from laziness. Truly lazy people do not torment themselves. They do not feel guilty. They are not uncomfortable with who they are. And they do not sit here listening to something like this with a heavy feeling in their chest. The procrastinator we are talking about is someone with high standards, someone who wants to do things properly, someone who is afraid of doing poorly and afraid of doing it wrong, afraid of starting and discovering their own inadequacy. That fear is what keeps them still. When a task carries the risk of exposing your imperfection, the brain reacts very quickly. It does not argue. It avoids. It whispers later. Not today. You need more preparation. If you do not recognize this as a biological reflex, you will mistake it for a reasonable thought, and you will follow it. Each time you do, you are not just delaying the task. You are doing something far more dangerous. You are breaking a promise to yourself. Repeated often enough, your brain learns something ugly, that your words do not matter, that your decisions cannot be trusted. And once you no longer trust yourself, starting anything becomes twice as heavy. To escape that discomfort, the brain looks for immediate relief. Scroll a little longer. Watch one more video. Delay one more day. Not because you are weak, but because your brain is buying a temporary painkiller. The problem is that this painkiller is expensive. It costs you more self-respect each time. I want you to listen carefully here. If you still believe your problem is lack of motivation or willpower, the next parts will be very hard to absorb, not because they are wrong, but because you are standing on the wrong foundation. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to be stronger. You do not need iron discipline. What you need first is to understand that your brain is afraid. And when the brain is afraid, it does not respond to grand speeches. It responds to one simple signal, that you are allowed to begin without being perfect. The moment you believe that if you start, you must do it properly, that is the moment you lock yourself in place. I have sat in front of very small tasks that I could not start. Not because they were hard, but because I had already built a perfect version of them in my head. When I looked at the distance between where I was and that version, my brain chose to quit before beginning. Each time, I blamed myself, and the next start became even harder. Much later, I understood that I did not need more discipline. I needed a different approach. I needed to allow myself to produce a very bad version, a very ugly one, just to create the physical existence of action. When you do not understand this, you think doing badly is failure, but not doing anything is the only real failure. This chapter does not ask you to act yet. It only asks you to stop condemning yourself, to stop calling yourself lazy, and to begin questioning the old belief that something is wrong with your character. If you take just one thing from this chapter, let it be this: procrastination is not a moral flaw. It is a misplaced defense mechanism. And a broken mechanism cannot be fixed with punishment. It can only be dismantled with a different approach. When you begin to see yourself as someone frozen by the fear of imperfection, rather than someone who needs to be whipped into motion, you will feel a small space open inside. And that space is where very small, very imperfect actions can finally begin to appear. Chapter 4. What sustainable discipline is and what it is not. When you hear the word discipline, a familiar image probably appears in your mind right away. You tense up. You grit your teeth. You force yourself to act even though everything inside resists. And if you have lived with that image long enough, you already know how it usually ends. At first, there is effort, then fatigue, then you slip, and finally comes the familiar shame of once again breaking a promise to yourself. I want to pause right here and say one thing clearly, not to comfort you, but to put the problem back where it belongs. Your issue may never have been a lack of discipline. It may be that you were taught the wrong idea of discipline from the very beginning. You were taught that discipline means defeating your emotions, being stronger than the part of you that wants to rest, forcing yourself forward even while something inside is pushing back. It sounds logical. It sounds tough. But if that approach truly worked for you, you would not have struggled for so long, and you would not be listening to these words in a state of exhaustion right now. That kind of discipline can work for people who already have momentum, who still trust themselves, who are still keeping their promises. But for someone who has broken promises to themselves too many times, it stops being discipline and turns into pressure. And every time action is mentioned, your brain remembers past failures. Your brain is not stupid. It learns quickly. It remembers that every time you tell yourself to try harder, to be stricter, you are stepping into a familiar loop that starts with determination and ends with self-blame. So it resists from the very beginning. It makes you hesitate. It stretches out those first few seconds until you give up. Not because you are lazy, but because it is trying to protect you from getting hurt again. Many people refuse to look straight at this. They believe they are weak, inadequate, lacking willpower, when the truth is that they have used the wrong tool for far too long. So long that the system inside no longer believes any new promise. Sustainable discipline does not begin with forcing yourself to do more, and it does not begin with changing how you feel. It begins with a very small but critical shift. You stop fighting yourself at the moment of starting. It does not require readiness. It does not need motivation. And it certainly does not ask you to believe that this time you will do it properly. It asks only one thing, that you allow yourself to begin in an imperfect state, deliberately, and that you do it as early as possible, before your brain pulls you back into its familiar negotiation. You were taught to prepare carefully, to do things properly, to respect your work. None of that is wrong. What trapped you was not high standards, but the order in which you placed them. When you believe there are only two options, either do it properly or do not do it at all, your brain will always choose the option that hurts less in the short term. Not doing it, from its point of view, that choice is perfectly rational. Sustainable discipline does not remove standards. It simply changes the order. Action comes first, even if it is messy, clumsy, unfinished. Everything else comes later. Very often, the act of starting alone is enough for rhythm to form on its own, without any extra force. What matters here is not how much you do, but the mindset you bring into action. If every start feels like putting your self-worth on trial, if doing it badly means you are flawed, then action will always be wrapped in fear. But if you see it as nothing more than an opening move, nothing more, then your brain has far less reason to resist. Sustainable discipline is about training the reflex to begin, not chasing positive emotions. Emotions arrive slowly, and they usually come after you have already acted. Reflexes can be trained through small actions taken at the right moment. In this chapter, I do not need you to understand everything. I do not need you to believe me yet. I only want you to begin doubting your old belief that perhaps for all these years you were not lacking willpower, but were forced to use it in the wrong way. That perhaps discipline is not a whip you use on yourself whenever you slow down, but a structure intelligent enough that you no longer need the whip at all. I am not asking you to change anything right now. I am not asking for promises. I only want you to set aside, for a moment, the old image of discipline you once trusted and leave a small opening for another possibility. That you can act without first becoming a stronger version of yourself. That you only need to be someone willing to do one very small, very imperfect thing. Something trivial. And to do it the moment the intention appears. Chapter 5. The Psychological Contract, the Right to Do It Wrong. When you reach this chapter, chances are you already understand quite clearly what has been happening to you. You no longer think you are lazy. You have also recognized that familiar voice in your head, the one that keeps saying, wait a little longer, prepare a little more. But instead of feeling lighter, you feel more tired. Tired because you know what is going on, yet you still cannot start. Tired because the task is actually small, but something inside keeps pressing you down. You stand in front of what you need to do, your hand almost touching it, but your body will not move. What weighs on you most is not that the task is hard. It is the feeling that if you do it, you must do it properly. And if you cannot do it properly, then it is better not to do it at all. I want to tell you this directly. That belief is what is holding you back. Not because it is morally wrong, but because to your brain, it feels dangerous. When you believe that doing something poorly is shameful, every action becomes a test, a test of whether you are good enough. And when everything feels like a test, the brain chooses the safest option. Do not start. You can see this clearly if you look at yourself honestly. You do not procrastinate on everything. You procrastinate on the things that matter to you, the things tied to the person you want to become. The more important it is, the more frozen you feel. Not because you are weak, but because you are afraid of falling short. And that fear did not appear out of nowhere. It comes from breaking promises to yourself too many times. Each time you started and then quit, you lost a little more trust in yourself. Your brain remembers that. It learns that starting leads to disappointment. So the next time, it stops you even earlier. With heaviness, with boredom, with reasons that sound very reasonable. All of it just to protect you from a familiar kind of pain. That is why pushing yourself to do better, to be stricter, only tightens the loop. In this chapter, I do not want you to try harder. I do not want you to set goals or make promises either. I want you to change the rules of the game. I want you to make a very simple agreement with yourself. Give yourself permission to create a bad version. A deliberately bad version. Not bad because you gave up, but bad as a strategy. You need to understand this. Your brain does not need a good result to allow action. It only needs safety. It needs to know that what you are about to do will not threaten your self-respect. When you tell it that you are only making a bad version, that you will not judge it, not fix it, not use it to prove anything. The pressure drops. When the pressure drops, action has room to appear. At that point, quality is no longer the target. The only goal is to make the action exist. A file opened, a line written, a movement made, even if it is wrong. No editing. No reviewing, no judging. Just let it exist. To the brain, existence matters more than perfection. When it registers that you did what you said you would do, even badly, it begins to update its image of you. It starts to doubt the old belief that starting is dangerous. And you will feel lighter. Not because you achieved something big, but because in that moment, you took back control. I know your mind will argue. It will say, what is the point of this? How does doing something badly help you improve? I understand. That is the old voice, the voice of standards and expectations. But at this stage, the problem is not that you do not know how to do things well. The problem is that you are not doing anything at all. And between doing nothing and doing something badly, doing it badly is the way out. Not to show off, not to keep, but to break the ice. Once the ice breaks, movement can begin. If you keep demanding that everything be right from the start, you will stay stuck for a very long time. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to listen to your body. If the idea of making a bad version makes you feel even slightly lighter, that is a clear signal. That is where you can begin. This chapter does not ask you to go far. It only gives you permission to take a very low step, so low that there is nothing left to lose, and from exactly there, action can finally return to your life. Chapter 6, the 30-second rule. Killing hesitation. I know that when you step into this chapter, you are no longer tired because you don't understand. You are tired because of something else. You understand, yet you still don't act. You have just given yourself permission to do things imperfectly. You felt lighter because you realized you don't need to be perfect to begin, but then, the very moment you think about the task you need to do, you pause. Just a few seconds. You start weighing things. You think a bit more, and then everything freezes. The task is still there. You are still there. And this time the disappointment feels heavier because there is nothing left to blame except yourself. I want you to look straight at one very small detail, but one that decides everything. Procrastination does not begin with giving up. It begins in the first few seconds, right after an intention appears. In that moment, your brain speaks, very softly, very reasonably. It does not tell you to stop completely. It only tells you to wait a little, think a little more, prepare a little better. And because those words sound intelligent, you believe them. You think you are doing the right thing. But in reality, those few seconds are slowly crushing your action. You need to understand one important thing. Starting is not a big decision. It is a reflex, and a reflex cannot be handled with thinking. You cannot argue with it. The more you think, the stronger it becomes. Your brain is designed to avoid discomfort and save energy. As soon as a task feels slightly difficult, slightly heavy, slightly uncomfortable, it tries to pull you away. And the most effective tool it uses is thinking. You may have believed that you need the right emotion to act, that you need motivation, that you need to feel ready. But if that were true, you would not have been stuck for so long. The truth is, emotions do not lead action. Action creates emotion. And if you keep waiting for the right feeling to appear first, you will stand still for a very long time. So what should you do in those first few seconds? The answer is very simple. So simple that your brain may want to dismiss it. You do not give yourself time to think. When the thought of doing the task appears, you immediately perform one opening action. Not finishing the work, not doing it well. Just one action small enough to make your body move. Open the file. Stand up. Write the first line. Put on your shoes. Anything that moves you from standing still into doing. What matters is that you do not negotiate with yourself in that moment. Do not ask whether you feel like it. Do not ask whether you are ready. Those questions do not help you start. They only help you delay in a more sophisticated way. You do not need to feel ready to open a file. You do not need motivation to stand up. You only need to act before your brain has time to create more reasons. You may worry that this sounds mechanical, but look honestly at your reality. Your procrastination is already mechanical. It is an old reflex repeated too many times. What you are doing now is simply replacing that reflex with a new one. The old reflex is think and stop. The new reflex is think and immediately take a small step. There is one thing you must remember. The opening action has no responsibility to produce results. Its only job is to kill hesitation. If you win those first few seconds, everything that comes after feels lighter. You will not always continue. And that is fine. Your goal is not perfection. Your goal is training a reflex. Every time you think about a task and you act right away, even for just 1 minute, your brain records a new signal. It records that you are someone who acts, not just someone who thinks. Gradually, the voice that pulls you back becomes quieter. Not because the task becomes easier, but because your body is no longer used to standing still. This chapter does not ask you to become someone else. It only asks you to stop handing over the first few seconds to your brain. And if there are moments when you slow down again, when you freeze again, that does not mean you are weak. It only means the old reflex is still there. And reflexes are changed through repetition, not through self-blame. The moment the next thought of doing something appears, I do not want you to think more. I want you to take one small action first. It does not need to be beautiful. It does not need to be right. It only needs to begin. Chapter 7. Keeping Promises to Yourself, Restoring Self-Respect. When you reach this chapter, you may have already started doing a few small things. Not many, not pretty, but real. And right at that moment, a different kind of tiredness appears. Not complete paralysis anymore, but the kind of tiredness that comes from hoping for a moment, and then immediately feeling afraid. Afraid that everything will fall back to how it was. Afraid that you will quit halfway again, like so many times before. If you feel that way, I want you to understand something very clearly. This feeling does not mean you are weak. It only means you have broken promises to yourself too many times. There is an uncomfortable truth that needs to be said. It is not that you do not know what to do. It is not that you lack motivation. What you are missing is trust in your own words. Over the years, every time you said you would do something and then did not, your brain learned very quickly. It learned that these words are not reliable. And at some point, just thinking about committing to something makes your body pull back. Not because you are lazy, but because it wants to protect you from another familiar disappointment. Many people believe that self-respect comes from achievement, from doing something big, difficult, perfect. But this belief has exhausted a lot of people. Self-respect does not come from results. It comes from consistency between what you say and what you do. When your words and your actions match, even in very small ways, your inner foundation becomes solid. And when they do not, when you keep betraying your own words, it does not matter how much you achieve. Inside still feels empty. You might be waiting for me to give you a new goal, but no, I do not need you to set another goal. I do not need you to try harder. The only thing that needs to change is how you make promises to yourself. In the past, you made promises that were too big, too far from where you actually were. And then you could not keep them. Not because you were incapable, but because those promises were not designed to be kept. From now on, if you want to keep any sense of self-respect, you need to learn how to promise smaller. So small that failure almost has no place to enter. 1 minute, one action, one thing that even on your worst day you can still do. And once you promise that, you must do it. It does not need to be good. It does not need to be enough. It only needs to match what you said. There is one moment many people overlook. The moment right after you finish that small action. You usually move on immediately. You treat it as nothing special, and your brain records nothing. But this moment is where self-respect is built. You need to pause for a breath. Just one breath. And acknowledge that you did exactly what you said you would do. No self-praise, no big emotion, just recognition of that fact. The brain does not learn from encouragement. It learns from evidence. Every time you keep a promise, you give it one piece of proof that you are trustworthy, and at first, the proof is tiny, but it accumulates, and one day, when you think about acting, your body no longer pulls away, because it is no longer afraid that you will betray yourself. I know there will be a voice in your head that resists this. It will say, this is too small, too insignificant, that it cannot possibly change anything. I want you to understand that this is not reason speaking. This is an old habit trying to pull you back into a familiar loop. You do not need to argue with it. You only need to not follow it. This chapter does not ask you to do more. It only asks you to stop harming yourself with promises you cannot keep. From this point on, every promise you make to yourself must be one you can fulfill. And every time you fulfill it, you must acknowledge it, not to feel proud, but to repair a relationship that has been broken for a long time. The relationship between you and your own words. You will not see a dramatic change right away, and you do not need to. Just a very subtle feeling that you stand a little straighter inside yourself, that you dislike yourself a little less, and that you trust yourself enough to do one more small thing, that is all. Chapter 8. Stop negotiating. Start commanding. When you step into this chapter, I know you've already passed through a difficult stretch. You're no longer confused. You know what you need to do. You've stood up before. You've opened the file. You've done a small thing, but at the same time, you've become tired in a different way. Tired because every time you hesitate, you know exactly what just happened. Not because you're lazy, but because you negotiated with yourself again. And each time that happens, a very quiet feeling appears inside you. Not loud, not dramatic, just a slight drop, a subtle sense of self-disrespect. You are not weak. You don't lack determination. You are stuck in internal negotiations that have gone on for too long. You negotiate about whether to start. You negotiate about whether resting a bit longer is okay. You negotiate about whether you should be strict with yourself today. And the most dangerous part is that you believe those negotiations are you. You think they are reason, kindness to yourself, necessary flexibility for living. But the truth is, there is a voice inside you that is very good at disguising itself. It doesn't command. It doesn't threaten. It speaks softly. It sounds like logic. It says you need rest. It says you're not ready yet. It says this isn't the right moment. And because it's partly right, you give it the authority to decide. You don't realize that you've just handed control to an avoidance reflex. You need to understand this clearly. Those statements are not deep thoughts. They are not your true nature. They are reflexes. They appear very quickly, the moment your brain senses pressure or discomfort. Your brain doesn't care whether this task matters to your life. It cares about one thing only. Is this safe? If it feels uncomfortable, the negotiation reflex turns on, automatically, without asking permission. The problem isn't that you hear those thoughts. That's normal. The problem is that you respond to them. Every time you respond, even with a silent nod, your brain learns a very clear lesson. That procrastination is acceptable, that your current feelings have veto power over your commitments. And the brain learns fast. It doesn't listen to what you promise. It believes what you do. You don't need to defeat that voice. You don't need to argue with it. You don't need to prove it wrong. You only need to do something much simpler. Name it correctly. The moment a familiar sentence appears, just recognize it as an avoidance reflex. Not me, not my decision, just an old mechanism turning itself on. When you name it correctly, something important happens. You separate yourself from the negotiation. You're no longer standing inside it. You step outside, and when there's no one answering, the negotiation weakens on its own. It loses its target. From this moment, your role changes. You're no longer someone searching for motivation. You are the one in command. A commander doesn't argue with emotions. A commander doesn't ask whether today feels right. A commander checks one thing only. Has the opening action been defined? If it has, then execute it. No extra thinking. This is not cruel. On the contrary, it's the only way to stop hurting yourself. Every time you negotiate, you think you're being kind, but in reality, you're breaking trust with yourself. You say one thing and do another, and your brain records that clearly. When you stop negotiating, you don't turn into a machine. Emotions are still there. Fatigue still shows up, but decision-making no longer lives there. It lives in the system you've chosen, in an opening action so small it doesn't require debate. Open the file, stand up, write one line, that's all. You may notice something interesting. Emotions don't disappear when you act, but they weaken faster than you expect. Not because you force them down, but because your brain starts learning a new lesson. That action is not dangerous, that you are still safe, that you can trust yourself a little more. This chapter doesn't ask you to do more. It only asks you to stop at the right moment. Stop before the negotiation stretches out. Notice the familiar sentence, and instead of responding, return to the opening action you already defined. You don't need to be stronger. You just need to stop negotiating. And from those very small moments, the authority inside you begins to return. Chapter 9: A 7-Day Roadmap to Rewire the System. When you step into this chapter, I imagine you are carrying a feeling that is very familiar and also very tiring. You are no longer lacking understanding. You already know why you procrastinate. You already know why trying harder has not solved it. And because you understand all that, you become cautious. You are afraid to hope again. Afraid to promise again. Afraid to break that promise to yourself one more time. This feeling does not mean you are weak. It simply means you have been disappointed too many times, and your brain has learned to keep its distance. It no longer lets you believe too quickly. Before we talk about 7 days, I need you to hear one thing clearly. What you are about to do is not a challenge. It is not a moral commitment. It is not a test of how disciplined you are. If you enter this with the idea that you must do it perfectly, must follow everything exactly, then you are putting yourself back into the same old tension. That tension always ends with quitting. This plan does not exist to prove what kind of person you are. It exists to see what happens when you change the way you begin. So treat these 7 days as a small experiment. No one is scoring you. No one is watching. The only goal is to observe what happens inside you when, each day, you make one very small opening move. You are not building achievements. You are sending a signal, a signal that this person can begin. On the first day, what you face is not the task itself. What you face is paralysis, the fear of not doing it well enough. So the only thing you need to do is allow yourself to create an intentionally bad version. It does not need to be complete. It does not need to be good. It only needs to exist. A clumsy paragraph. A wrong movement. A few minutes of reading that you do not understand. You do not fix it. You do not improve it. You simply let the action happen. Your brain does not need quality at this point. It needs proof that starting is not dangerous. On the second day, you stop asking for permission. You train reaction. You will notice that hesitation appears very quickly. Just a few seconds, at the seconds where you start thinking more, weighing options, waiting for the right feeling. Each time the thought of a task appears, you make the opening move immediately. Open the file. Stand up. Pick the object up. You do not have to continue. Just open the door. You are teaching your brain that thoughts do not need long discussions. On the third day, you touch something deeper. Keeping your word to yourself. You do not set big goals. You cut the promise down very small. So small that it almost cannot fail. 1 sentence, 1 minute, 1 movement. When it is done, you acknowledge one simple thing. I did what I said I would do. This feeling may be subtle, but it is something that has been missing from your life for a long time, and every time it comes back, a small piece of self-respect is repaired. The days after that are not explosive days. They are repeating days, repeating the act of starting, repeating small promises kept. Along the way, you will hear the familiar voices again. Later. Not ready yet. Need to learn more. This time, you do not argue. You simply recognize them. This is avoidance, not truth. When you name it correctly, its power weakens, and you return to the opening move you already prepared. On the last day, you do not need a summary. You do not need an evaluation. You only need to ask yourself one question. Over these 7 days, have I stopped standing still the way I used to? If the answer is no, even just a little, then the mechanism has begun to change. You did not become a different person. You simply stopped freezing when it was time to begin. And for this chapter, that is enough. Chapter 10. When you fall. Laziness or exhaustion. When you reach this part, there's a good chance you're tired. Not tired because you've done too much, but tired because some days you did it, and some days you didn't. There were moments you moved quickly, without hesitation, and then moments when you stayed still and started doubting yourself, wondering if you were sliding back into the old version of you, wondering if everything so far was just a short burst of excitement. This feeling isn't loud, but it eats away at your self-respect very fast. And if you're not careful, you start punishing yourself from the inside. And you usually do something familiar. You lump every moment of inaction into one single label. Lazy, eek, undisciplined. And then you react to that label. Either you force yourself until you're drained, or you give up because you think it's already ruined anyway. Both paths make you more exhausted and make you dislike yourself even more. I want you to pause here for a moment, just long enough to see one simple truth. Not every time you don't act is the same. Sometimes you don't act because you're avoiding, but sometimes you don't act because your system is genuinely out of energy. Your body is empty. Your mind is empty. Everything feels heavy. But because you're used to blaming yourself, you don't separate these states. You throw them all together, and when you do that, you lose the ability to read your own signals. At that point, you're no longer responding with clarity. You're reacting emotionally. When you feel guilty, you push. When you feel discouraged, you quit. You call that discipline, or lack of discipline. But in reality, it's just a machine running without a control panel. Discipline is not always moving forward. Discipline is knowing what state you're in and responding correctly to that state. An athlete doesn't train hard when the muscle is already torn. A machine doesn't run at full power when the warning light is on. But with yourself, you often do the opposite. You treat every signal to slow down as betrayal, and you pay for that belief by collapsing. At this stage, your brain is no longer afraid to start. Instead, it's afraid of doing it wrong. It's afraid that if you rest, you'll slide backward. Afraid that if you slow down, you won't come back. So it gives you advice that sounds very reasonable. Rest a bit more so you can recover properly, or push a bit harder to finish it. Both sound right, but without a clear criterion, you choose based on emotion, and emotion is not a reliable commander. What you need here is not more pushing or more resting. What you need is to look, to see whether you're being mentally avoidant or physically depleted. These two states are not the same. If you're avoiding in your head, you still have energy. You're still making excuses, still delaying. In that case, a very small opening action is still possible, and you need to cut off negotiation. But if you're truly depleted, everything feels heavy. Even thinking is exhausting. There's no urge to escape, just emptiness. In that case, forcing yourself is not discipline, it's damage. When you start to tell these two states apart, something important happens. You stop attacking yourself, not because you've become softer, but because you've become more precise. You no longer treat every slowdown as a moral failure. You start treating yourself like a system that needs to be operated, not a criminal that needs punishment. From there, your behavior shifts quietly. When you're genuinely tired, you allow yourself to rest without guilt. You rest in order to return. When you're just hesitating, you don't let yourself drift. You take a small action, not to finish the task, just to keep your word. And you'll notice something different. When you stop beating yourself every time you fall, you come back faster. When you stop forcing yourself while depleted, you last longer. Discipline no longer feels like a constant internal war. It becomes a series of clear decisions. Now I act. Now I rest. Now I return. No drama. No heroics. Just enough to keep moving forward without breaking yourself in. Chapter 11, From a Procrastinator to Someone You Can Trust. When you reach this chapter, I believe you are no longer standing still like you were at the beginning. You understand what has been happening to you. You have tried allowing yourself to do things imperfectly. You have done a few very small but very real things. Maybe you opened a file. Maybe you stood up. Maybe you started and then stopped. And right at this moment, a different feeling appears. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is a quiet kind of fatigue. You are not tired because you cannot do anything. You are tired because you do not dare to believe yet. In your mind, one question keeps coming back. Will this time be different? Will I fall back into my old self again? Will I give up again in a few days and disappoint myself one more time? That question does not appear because you are weak. It appears because you have broken promises to yourself too many times before. Your brain has learned something painful, that trusting yourself is a risk, that every time you hope, you might be disappointed. So even when you are doing better, your brain holds you back. It whispers quietly, "Do not dwell too much. Do not be too happy. Be careful." And if you do not recognize this mechanism, you will unconsciously slow yourself down. You will act halfway. You will not dare to commit. You will keep yourself in a safe middle zone so that if you fall, it will hurt less. But that middle zone is exactly where you have been stuck for a long time. There is a false belief that many people still carry at this point. The belief that a trustworthy person is someone who never slips, someone with perfect discipline, someone who is consistent without interruption. Because of that belief, you quietly place a very heavy test on yourself. You think that only when you can keep this rhythm long enough do you earn the right to trust yourself. Only when you no longer stop halfway do you deserve to feel proud. But if you wait for that day, you will never truly begin to trust again. Humans do not operate in perfect straight lines. No one moves upward forever without slowing down. And if every small slip is treated as proof that you are still the same old person, your brain will choose a safer strategy. Do not try too hard. Do not trust too much. Do not go too far. So you will not be disappointed. This defensive mechanism is what pulls many people back into procrastination, even when they clearly know what they need to do. So in this chapter, what matters is not creating more motivation. It is not promising a big transformation. What matters is seeing trust in a different way. Trust does not mean never failing. Trust means that after each failure, you return to the opening action. Trust is not the excitement of believing you have changed. Trust is when you say you will do one very small thing, and you do it. No matter your mood, no matter how poor the result looks. Your brain does not build trust from big promises. It only records what actually happens. It records that there was action, that there was movement, that you did not disappear completely. When this evidence repeats enough times, a very quiet feeling appears. You no longer need to tell yourself that you are different. You simply feel less doubt, less need to convince yourself. When you think about what needs to be done, it no longer feels as heavy as before. Not because you are better, but because your brain has experienced that you will do something, even if it is very small. I want you to notice a subtle shift at this stage. Before, when you thought about yourself, you often asked what kind of person you were. Am I disciplined? Am I trustworthy? Those questions sound deep, but they keep you frozen because you are trying to judge your entire identity in a single moment. When a new mechanism forms, the question changes naturally. It becomes practical. What is the next thing? What can I do right now? Where is the opening action? When this question appears more often than questions about who you are in a different position. You are no longer standing outside watching yourself. You are inside the movement. And I want to be clear so you do not place the wrong pressure on yourself. There will be days when you slip. There will be moments when you do not do what you intended. That does not destroy the process. Only one thing destroys it. Using that slip to conclude who you are. Saying to yourself, that is it. I am still the same. Using one day to erase many days before it. But if you slip, notice it. And then return to one opening action. Even a very small one. The mechanism continues to strengthen. Your brain still records that you are someone who comes back. Not someone perfect, but someone who comes back. And that is the only kind of trust that truly exists in real life. In this chapter, I do not need you to promise anything more. I do not need you to believe me. I only need you to allow yourself to believe just enough in one very specific thing, that when the next task appears, you will do its opening action. No emotion required, no guarantees, just do it. If you can hold that through a sequence of days with both slips and returns, one day you will notice a very quiet change. You no longer have to try to trust yourself. You simply know that you will do something. And for many people, that is enough for everything to keep moving forward. I want to close the book with something very simple. If you have stayed with me until these final moments, that fact alone is already an action, not a big action, not a dramatic turning point, but a quiet sign that you still care about yourself, about learning to operate your life in a different way. And that alone is enough to say that you were never someone who gave up, even if you have postponed things many times. I do not expect that after listening to this book, you will become a completely different person. Nor do I expect you to wake up tomorrow filled with some unfamiliar surge of energy. What I hope is that you begin to see action differently, with more gentleness, more realism, and less judgment toward yourself. You do not need to win every day. You only need to stop turning your back on yourself. Each time you begin, no matter how small, each time you keep a very small promise to yourself, you are quietly rebuilding the most important thing that procrastination has taken away, your self-respect. The road ahead will not be straight, and there will certainly be days when you slow down again, doubt yourself again, and feel the urge to negotiate with yourself again. When that happens, I hope you remember that failure does not mean you lack discipline. It only means you need to return to smaller, simpler, and more honest steps. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to run without rest, but about knowing when to stop so that you do not lose the ability to continue. If there is one thing I hope you carry with you after this book, it is not a clever idea or a beautiful sentence, but the feeling that you can begin again, right where you are, without waiting to become better or more ready. Because action does not come after you believe in yourself. It is repeated small actions that teach you how to trust yourself again. And if today you manage to do just one very small thing, then today has already mattered. From here on, there is no need to rush and no need to be perfect. Simply keep showing up, keep beginning, and let the new mechanism you are building do the rest. And